Good afternoon. I'm Lisa Garber, and this is Law News. We're in the middle of waiting for a jury verdict in the Holly Bobo case. Again, this dates back to 2011, and jurors are deciding if Zachary Adams is guilty of kidnapping, raping, and murdering nursing student Holly Bobo back in 2011. I am joined right now with Jessica Jackson Sloan. Hi, Jessica.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
Thank you for being here. And Jessica, I just want to give our viewers a quick background into what you do because your career is absolutely fascinating. And I know it will bring us a unique perspective on this case right now. Jessica is a human rights attorney based out of California. She's also the mayor of Mill Valley in California and the co-founder of #Cut50, which is a national bipartisan effort to reduce America's incarceration rate. And that's what I really want to chat with you about today.
Yes, well, thank you. So as you said, I'm National Director of Cut50. Cut50 is sort of a unique organization because what we really focus on is translating local needs into state and federal policy. So a lot of the time you see state laws or federal laws that come down and they're well-intentioned to reduce, our prison population, but sometimes they just fail at the local level. So we work directly with the people who are the most impacted by policies, formerly incarcerated, currently incarcerated, crime survivors, local elected officials, law enforcement, and together we identify the needs of our communities and work together to change the laws.
That's absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much. And I'm sure you've been following this case. It's been gaining national attention, huge case. And when you look at, I was talking with our last guest, a criminal defense attorney, about some of the issues we're seeing in the witnesses. And we're seeing people that, have been called as part of this case, have committed crimes previously, are potentially drug addicts. And you look at this slew of characters, when you're talking about reducing incarceration rates, when you see this type of case, what do you think?
Well, I think there's a lot of policies that have been made in the wake of cases like this. And first of all, my heart goes out to the victim's family, to Holly Bobo's family. I have a 13-year-old daughter. I can't imagine, if she went off to school and ended up dead. It would be soul crushing. So, there was a horrible, horrible crime committed here. But the problem is a lot of the time you'll see sort of knee-jerk reactions by policymakers. We've seen it over and over again here in California and across the country where a really bad case like this triggers much harder sentencing laws. The problem is that we've realized over the last 3-4 decades that these reactive, tough-on-crime policies aren't actually making our communities safer. A lot of folks are getting caught up in these policies and ending up in prisons and jails that simply don't have the resources or aren't directing the resources into rehabilitation so that when the people who are in prison or jail are coming home, they haven't been prepared to re-enter successfully and become contributing members of society. So there's about 2.2 million people who are incarcerated right now in the United States, and 90% of them are going to be coming home. So we need to be focused on rehabilitation and education and opportunities that will not just prevent crime, but will break the cycle of violence and incarceration.
Very interesting analysis. Thank you. And it's very important work that you're doing, obviously. And at this point, I'd like to turn to the Holly Bobo case. Again, as you said, our condolences go out to the victim in this case and her family. It's an awful situation. And I know a lot of our viewers, we were talking about this a little bit earlier. We saw the testimony from the cell phone forensic expert. We saw the testimony from the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. And they're talking about what actual hard evidence exists, which is the cell phone triangulation, pinging, seeing where Holly Bobo's cell phone was in terms of where the other cast of characters' devices were at that time, because we don't see any DNA or other hard evidence at this point, apart from what Jason Autry is saying in other testimony and corroborating testimony. So you were mentioning to me that you think this will result in a guilty verdict.
I think there's the likelihood that it will, but there's always the possibility that it will. And in light of that, defense needs to be prepared for the next phase as well.
And that's what I want to talk to you about. Our viewers are curious, and as am I, if if he is found guilty, if Zack is found guilty, what happens next? And what does the defense have to do after that?
So the way it works is if they're seeking death penalty, there's going to be two phases to your trial. The guilt phase, which is basically the did he do it or not, and then the penalty phase, which is a determination of whether he's going to spend the rest of his life in a prison cell or if he's going to be given the death penalty. During that phase, the jury is able to weigh a lot more evidence than they were in the beginning. Stuff from his life, his childhood. There'll be testimony, hopefully there'll be testimony from his family, friends, teachers, doctors, anybody who can speak to the social history and his life, what happened up until the moment of this crime that he will then have been found guilty of. I think, it's interesting that you point to sort of the lack of hard evidence. There's also been, some flaws on the defense side. And I will say that I think, there hasn't been a front loading of any of this mitigation kind of evidence. Usually a good defense attorney will make sure that they are getting the mitigating factors in up front so that the jury is consistently hearing about any mental health issues, any sort of IQ problems and learning disabilities and drug and alcohol abuse, any trauma that the defendant has experienced, so that they're hearing a consistent theme throughout both the penalty, both the guilt and the penalty phase.
So when you're talking about mitigating factors in this case, if you were on the defense counsel team, what would you have done and what would you be doing now at this point, thinking that there might be a guilty verdict at hand?
Well, I think it's really important that, the investigation is done properly. And this is really, really hard. I had the fortune during my career of working on state and federal habeas cases. So this is after the trial has happened. Once a guilty verdict has been found, once a person has been sentenced to death, and then they're in their appeals process. So you've got a little bit more time and a few more resources, depending on what state you're in, to actually conduct a thorough analysis. You go out, you get records, you get their school records to look for any signs of mental illness, any signs of, trauma that might mitigate what they've been through and the crime that they've committed, any signs of substance abuse, any signs of generational trauma, because we now know, thanks to science, that factors that your experiences that your parents had can actually factor into your behavior as well. So hopefully the defense has been out there with investigators, making sure that they've had the client checked with a neuropsychologist, making sure that they've had him speaking to a social historian, making sure that they're interviewing family and friends, and really putting together a holistic picture of his life and who he is and what trauma he has experienced that led up to that moment.
So when you're talking about this holistic picture of his life, we've heard multiple rounds of testimony where Jason Autry himself has said, well, we were talking about meth, we were doing meth. This testimony that really surrounds on the idea that they're constantly using drugs. And I know that's been a real theme of this trial. And I'm curious what your perspective is when you're talking about mitigating factors. How is this going to play towards the jury on this case?
So under Tennessee law, they're not going to recognize it as mitigation, the fact that he was voluntarily intoxicated. That's not going to be any sort of defense to what happened. However, talking about the extreme meth usage, which it sounds like it is based on the testimony that's been given, and talking about the fact that he started using meth at a very young age. We know from brain science now that the brain is not fully formed. It's not fully developed until you're 25. And he began using drugs much before then. So it impaired the functioning of his brain from an early age. So, it's up to the jury to weigh the mitigation against the aggravation. The aggravation is going to be the facts of this case. There's some pretty horrific facts in this case that might really sway the jury. This is also a jury picked from a county that lived in fear for a couple of years while this investigation was going on before a suspect was found. And I know several of the members of the jury, although they said they could be impartial, had heard of the case ahead of time, and they're going to be bringing that in with them as they're listening to all of this evidence. So, it'll depend on how the defense attorney does in terms of telling that story of his life, as well as what the jury decides once they've weighed the mitigation against the aggravation.
And I just would love to hear your thoughts. This is a conversation that a thread that we've been kind of pulling since 9 a.m. this morning. We've been talking a little bit about Clint Bobo and his role, Holly Bobo's brother, in this case. And you talk about the defense and mitigation and strategy. We've been seeing how Clint, called his mom. He said that his sister was seen going off into the woods with someone in a camouflage jacket. His mom said that's not her boyfriend, call the police. And then we've also seen testimony from Jason Autry saying, well, we were doing meth. We were teaching Clint how to manufacture meth. And I'm curious if you have any thoughts on how the defense maybe should have utilized that potential issue as part of its strategy, this Clint issue.
Yeah, I think it's important to utilize everything they can in this case, and be able to really put out all the facts. So, there is an inconsistency in stories as far as Clint's testimony goes, and that should be highlighted. The meth factor, especially the manufacturing of meth, should definitely come back in if there is a penalty trial. Manufacturing of meth is extremely dangerous. It also produces a lot of chemicals that they're going to be standing around breathing while they're, preparing the methamphetamines to be used. There's not only going to be drug usage, there's also going to be drug manufacturing, which in the case of meth has its own sort of byproducts that would be affecting his brain chemistry and his decisions at the time. So, I think all of this stuff needs to come in, especially in the penalty phase. They need to talk about the extreme drug usage in this case, and really explain what drove them to even start using drugs and how that plays into this horrific crime.
So what kind of background research would they do? You mentioned a social historian, you mentioned investigations. What would that look like? And have you experienced something similar in your defense of cases that have this kind of element in them?
Absolutely. I've worked on several death penalty cases in which you just want to gather every single scrap of information you can about that individual, and not just them, but their family history. So you can talk about this generational trauma or generational poverty and how that plays into the crime. I worked on cases where, you had great-grandparents or great-great-grandparents who had been brought over here on slave ships and had been emancipated, and part of a migration, from the South to the West, and the factors that went into that, and the racism and the poverty and the violence in their community, as well as, the informal economies, some of which, of course, are still in existence today in impoverished areas, where people make choices not because they want to do something that's illegal, such as drug dealing, but because they don't have other opportunities to provide for themselves or provide for their families, and there's nobody coming in and investing for them and showing them different ways to actually get ahead without breaking the law. So, it's really important that they're doing a thorough investigation, that they're going out and getting those school records. A lot of the time they're going to be older school records. In a case like this, where the defendant is actually, pretty young, he's probably got digital school records, but you go out, you get those, you get medical records, which might show any sort of mental illness or head injuries or any other trauma that the defendant has experienced. And then you're able to put together a holistic story that, is based on testimony from family, friends, neighbors, school teachers, people in the community who knew the family, who can speak to what was going on in that home and how that person got to this moment where they decided to commit a crime.
Very, very helpful analysis. Thank you. And I know that's going to be extremely important in the next phases of this case. I do want to go back to some of the testimony we've been listening to, and one of them was Victor Dinsmore, who witness with immunity, who was talking about some of the drug usage habits of the key players in this case. And it's just a quick clip just to give our viewers a little bit of a refresh on what we're talking about here in terms of the drug usage.
To the questions that are asked of you, respond to that.
Okay.
Don't volunteer information unless
Okay.
you think it's necessary to explain your answer.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Mr. Dinsmore, I'm not asking for your address, but where do you live?
I live in Indianapolis, Indiana.
Okay, how long have you lived in Indianapolis?
5 going on 6 years.
Right, and who do you live with?
My wife.
Prior to moving to Indianapolis, where did you live?
Lived on Yellow Springs Road, Holiday, Tennessee.
Right, and you're actually, I'm not hearing you, so I'm going to get you to lower the mic or just speak up, okay?
All right.
And where did you live prior to moving to Indianapolis?
On 1551 Yellow Springs Road.
And how long did you live there?
About almost 7 years.
And before I ask you about maybe some of your acquaintances that you have on Yellow Springs, let me just go ahead and get it out of the way. With respect to your background, you were convicted when you were 19 or 20 of a rape, I believe.
I was 23 years old.
And how long did you do?
I did 2 years in penitentiary.
And have you done other prison time?
No.
So I want to jump forward, if you will, to 2011 and ask, at that time, did you know an individual by the name of Zachary Adams?
Yes, I did.
Do you see him in the courtroom today?
Yes, he's there.
Would you point him out just so the judge sees who you're pointing to?
Right there.
All right, for the record, the defendant.
And in addition to Zachary Adams, did you know his brother Dylan?
Yes, I did.
Did you know an individual by the name of Shane Austin?
Yes, I did.
Did you know an individual by the name of Jason Autry?
Yes, I did.
Did you know an individual by the name of CarlStapler?
Yes, I did. Statler.
Stabler. Okay. I asked if you'd done any more time, and you said no, despite not having been caught. Were you selling drugs off and on back at that time?
Yes, my disability money, it wasn't a lot of money, and I was doing whatever I had to do to survive. I was actually selling a little bit on the side.
All right, and what did you sell?
Morphine.
And you said your disability, do you have a significant
I've
injury?
had 7 back surgeries, so.
Despite being on disability and selling morphine on the side, you also appeared to have a pretty strong work ethic. You were working at that time.
All the time.
Right, and what kinds of jobs did you do?
Basically any kind of remodeling.
Okay. Different people in the area, you were pretty much on a project a good bit of the time.
Yeah, about every week or so.
All right. I asked about selling morphine. Did you or have you at that time ever sold morphine to the individuals that I asked if you knew? Adams, Autry, Austin.
Yes.
Of those, were you closest to Zachary Adams between him and Autry?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So if Autry, at least in the beginning phases, if Autry wanted morphine, would he go through Zach?
Zach or Shane?
Okay. So those were the two that you had the most contact with?
Yes.
Right. I want to draw your attention, please, to April the 13th of 2011. Do you remember what remodeling job, if any, that you were involved in at that time?
Yes, I was at Miss Dottie's home residence. I was redoing their garage and their kitchen, and I was in the garage at that time finishing up the trim and painting the doors and stuff.
Right. Now, everybody talks about Miss Dottie's. Who is Dottie?
Dottie's, they own a BP and a marina there right at the exit, and they're pretty well known right there. They're good people.
All
So
right. Is the name of it Dottie's Marine?
Dottie's BP and marina.
Okay. And you said right there at the exit. What exit?
Exit 126.
And that's off of 40.
Yes.
Okay. And she didn't live there, of course. So where did she live? Where was her house?
Miss Dottie's was right around the corner.
But not at the BP?
No, no,
Okay. Okay.
no.
But close to 126. Do you know where, of your own knowledge, where Zachary Adams actually lived?
Yes, he lived on 641, right up just down the road from Dottie's.
Well, I was going to ask you, how far from Zach Adams' house to Dottie's?
I could throw a rock there almost. It's not very far.
Okay.
So
And what about, and you lived on Yellow Springs Road, you know where Shane lived?
yes,
Where did he live?
about a mile down the road.
Same road?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Let me, I'll wait. So I asked you to think back to April the 13th, 2011. You said you were doing this remodeling at Dottie's home.
Yes,
Do you recall an incident that happened in the afternoon of the 13th?
yes, I do.
Right. And will you direct your answers to the jury and tell them what happened?
I was inside the garage doing some work. The cleaning lady had showed up, Debbie. Her and I had talked a little bit. She went to work. I went back to work. And then Zach and Shane and Train pulled up in Dylan's truck. And they got out, and one of them came in. Zach asked me if I had a joint. And I said, yeah, I've always got one that I took to work. And I went out and smoked it with them. And within 2 or 3 minutes, there was Zach and Shane Austin were arguing and fighting, and I heard a few little spurts out of their mouth about who was going to hit it first, and I never even put it together at all. And I told them they couldn't do that there because this was my job and they had to go, so they loaded up and took off. Train actually kind of broke them up, and they loaded up and took off. So.
And do you remember getting a morphine pill or Zach buying a morphine pill or Shane buying one for Autry while they were there?
No, not there.
This fight, how much of a fight was it?
Jumping around, basically. Swung at each other a couple times. One, I think Zach hit Shane, about blacked his eye. That's about all there was. So, and I went out and told them they couldn't do it. They had to go. So.
You said that they pulled up in Dylan's truck?
Dylan's Chevy.
Right. And what color was that truck?
Black.
And while they're on the property, does Zach make statements to you about speaking to your wife, going to your wife's house, and putting a car in your shop?
No.
You did not say that?
No.
At any time did he tell you that?
No.
Has he ever hidden a truck in your...
Twice.
Have you ever had his Nissan?
Yes. That was a very short time.
But you don't recall him mentioning it there?
No, I don't remember him saying anything there. I was trying to get them out of there before Mr. and Mrs. Doug or Dottie showed up.
Right. You recall, of course, being interviewed by law enforcement several years after this happened, correct?
Yes.
And in that statement, if you told the...
Your Honor, I object. I don't think he has said it. I don't understand what she's getting ready to do here.
Hi, I'm Lisa Garber. This is LawNewz, and I'm here with Jessica Jackson Sloan, human rights lawyer. And we have been talking about some mitigation factors in terms of the drug usage that's been rampant through all of the testimony of the Holly Bobo trial. We just heard from one of the witnesses who was granted immunity. He was talking about drug use and all of the key players, the defendant, Jason Autry. And Jessica, you and I were talking a little bit about how this could affect the jurors' interpretation of what's going on, but then also the next phase of what happens in terms of once a guilt finding is made, if that is in fact made. So do you want to talk a little bit about what you see as some of the potential issues, what the defense could be doing, and again, how drug use could play into what levels of punishment are made?
Absolutely. So, again, there's really two kinds of witnesses. There's lay witnesses, who are the people who can give testimony based upon what they've seen, what they've heard. And then there's going to be the expert witnesses who can talk from a more scientific perspective. The job of a good defense attorney is really to weave both of these kind of witness testimonies together to present a cohesive story to the jury that they can understand. So jurors are just like you and me. They are lay people who may or may not be particularly versed in science, probably not. And are probably not experts on brain science in particular, which is why drug use would be very pertinent to this case. So there's been some lay testimony of the drug use, the rampant drug use from a very early age that happened with the defendant in this case, as well as many of the other people involved in this case. Now in the penalty phase, the attorney has an opportunity, the defense attorney has an opportunity to present expert testimony that will talk about how that drug use could have impaired his decision making, how it could have affected his brain development, and how that would have impacted the crime that was committed here, as it would definitely cause issues with his impulse control and decision making. So the job of the defense attorney is going to be to make sure that it's an expert who's speaking in terms that the jury can understand and that they're able to grasp sort of the scientific data, look at the layperson's data and put it together to understand why the drug use, in this case, the extreme drug use, would have had an impact on his life and his decision making and ultimately this crime.
So Jessica, that's fine for the punishment phase, but why wasn't this brought up sooner?
This should have been brought up sooner. There's a lot going on in a guilt phase. There's, a resource issue normally when attorneys are getting out there and they're trying to work under time pressure on trial, find the evidence, find the witnesses. Things are usually pretty fresh in people's heads, although this case had sat around for a couple of years before defense was able to really step up and start working on it before the defendant was arrested. So, the defense attorney and the defense team has certain amount of resources to do all the investigation they can, to get the experts in there, to work with the defendant, to put together a cohesive guilt phase strategy that hopefully is tied into the penalty phase strategy, because there's always the possibility that your client will be found guilty and go to penalty phase. So you want to make sure you have a cohesive theory tying together both pieces of that trial, which can be extremely difficult because in the one side you're saying, he didn't do it, and then you're saying, well, these are all the traumatic factors that led to him doing it. So you really have to have a cohesive strategy to pull the two together. That can all be really hard in such a short period of time with such short amount of resources. What I will say is this isn't the only opportunity they have to present that. They'll have a direct appeal, so it won't be in front of a jury, but it will be going to a judge in which somebody will raise, hopefully, an ineffective assistance of counsel claim. That claim will allow and this would be in the habeas phase, that claim will allow an attorney, his habeas attorney, to go back and look at trial and say, the lawyer should have done this. He should have presented, or she should have presented these expert witnesses. She should have had testimony from these family members or school teachers or doctors to corroborate, some of the witness testimony as well. And to contextualize that. If so, it would have made a significant difference in the outcome of the case, and this client would not have been found guilty or would not have been sentenced to death. So they will have another opportunity at this. Unfortunately, it'll be many years down the road in habeas appeals, and there's not a very high likelihood of success there because of the legal standard.
It's so interesting that you say this because this has been such an intricate and involved element of this case, the drug use. I mean, it comes up in so many of these witnesses' pieces of testimony. And I actually am going to we're going to go to a clip shortly of CarlStapler, who was Zachary Adams' good friend. And he's talking about drug use. In layman's terms, he's talking about how drugs impacted Zack's judgment. And it's so interesting because we continue to hear this throughout the trial, that they're using all kinds of drugs, methamphetamine, morphine, and yet there's no expert opinion given. Is this something that you think is unusual, or is this really just a resource issue? Is it really ineffective assistance of counsel? What are your thoughts?
It'll depend on the outcome whether or not it's really ineffective assistance of counsel. So it might be, a strategic decision. I've yet to see a strategic decision like that really in the favor of the defendant. I would have definitely put on some expert testimony to help contextualize this for the ways. But if you're a layman, if you're a jury just sitting there listening to how these people chose to do drugs over and over and over again, and then hearing testimony of this horrific crime, it might be difficult to really look at it in the nuanced way of, he was a drug addict. The extreme drug usage from an early age negated his ability to really control his impulses, changed how his brain was formed, had a profound impact on who he became versus, he chose to do drugs and killed somebody. So that's why it's so important to have expert testimony there who can really explain this to the jury from a expert point of view, from a scientific point of view, and make them understand why this is so profoundly important. So I'm hoping to see that if there is a penalty phase, there needs to be that expert. Otherwise, the jury is going to go out on penalty as well, kind of wondering how all this drug testimony ties into the larger question of, should he be put to death or should he live in prison?
Jessica, fantastic analysis. Thank you. And just to contextualize this for our viewers, we're going to go back to a little piece of testimony from Zachary Adams, the defendant's good friend, CarlStapler. He's going to be talking about some of the drug use that was going on, and then we'll be back with Jessica shortly.
Did you grow up around there?
Yes, ma'am.
And how old are you?
28.
You know a person by the name of Zack Adams?
Yes, ma'am.
You see him in the courtroom?
Yes, ma'am.
Would you point him out, please?
For the record, the defendant.
Do you know a person by the name of Shane Austin?
Yes, ma'am.
And where's Shane Austin?
Dead from what I hear.
What about Dylan Adams?
Incarcerated. Yeah.
So you know all of those individuals. What about a guy named Jason Autry?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm going to take your attention back to 2011. Are you the same person today that you were then?
No, ma'am.
Are you working?
Yes, ma'am.
Have you been working for several years?
Yes, ma'am.
Stable?
Yes, ma'am.
Back in the day, were you, not living the same life you're living now?
Yes, ma'am.
During that time, is that when you knew Zack Adams and Shane Austin?
Yes, ma'am.
And let me just ask you, were you sort of involved in the drug culture back then?
Yeah, I was just kind of raised up in the area, and that's all I ever known until I had enough sense to get myself out of it.
And you moved to Nashville?
Yes, ma'am.
Because other witnesses have been asked, I want to ask you the same thing. Do you have any felonies?
No, ma'am.
Despite not having any felony convictions, you have some misdemeanors?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So back in 2011, you said you knew Zack Adams.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you remember hearing that a young lady by the name of Holly Bobo from Parsons had come up missing?
Yes, ma'am.
And was that big news in your town?
No.
Was not big news?
I mean, it's just another person that come up missing around there,
Was it on the television?
Yes.
And did you personally know anything about that?
No.
And did you know her?
No.
Did you know her family?
No.
Didn't know Karen Bobo, Clint Bobo, Holly's brother, Dana Bobo, her father?
No, ma'am.
Back in 2011, where did you live? Remember?
Yep, with Victor Dinsmore.
Okay. And that was off of Yellow Springs Road?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Believe you were dating his daughter, maybe?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And the jury has seen a picture, an aerial of the Dinsmore house and the big shop, I guess, that was out there. Did you live there on a permanent basis, or were you sort of coming and going?
Coming and going.
Now, did you have occasion after Holly was reported as missing to ever have a discussion with Zack Adams about that?
Will you repeat the question?
Okay, that was kind of probably not an easy question. The summer after Holly went missing, she went missing in April, so the summer after that, do you recall a time when you were riding around in Zack's truck with him?
Yes.
Okay. And did he make a statement to you about what you believed to be Holly Bobo and her disappearance?
Yes, ma'am.
Would you tell the jury what he said?
He said, "I let Shane hit it.
Said what?
I let Shane hit it."
And what did you take that to mean?
The only thing that it could mean, as far as I knew Zack Adams was concerned, and the Holly Bobo disappearance.
What did the word, and you may not want to say it, but what did...
Rape.
Rape. Right. Did you ask him any questions about it?
No, ma'am.
Did you want to know about it?
No, ma'am.
In addition, and that was the summer after
Yes.
Holly came missing?
Yes.
Or during the summer, I guess. Did you also have an occasion to be at a bar with him on a different day when he made certain statements?
Yes, ma'am.
And where was this bar located?
Johnny's Bar and Grill in Parsons, Tennessee.
Okay, and where in Parsons is Johnny's Bar and Grill?
It is about halfway down towards the interstate, towards Cherokee Heights, Woodland Shores area.
Okay. And I know you don't know the date, but you believe it to be at that same, the end of that same summer?
Yes, ma'am.
And what, if anything, did Zack say to you regarding Holly Bobo?
What did he say to me?
Or say to somebody else that you overheard?
He said, "I'll kill you like I did Holly Bobo."
And who did he say that to?
The bartender.
And was that bartender a male or a female?
Female.
What was her name?
Misty Tubbs.
I let Shane hit it. I'll do you like I did Holly Bobo. Did he make one more statement to you about Holly Bobo? And who was
Yes.
And who was responsible? What did he say to you?
He said, "I did it."
Where were you when he said, "I did it"? Was that also at that same bar?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you ask him any questions?
No, ma'am.
Did you want to know about it?
No, ma'am.
And until law enforcement came and talked to you, and did you ever report it?
Yes.
Who did you report it to?
The TBI.
And when they asked you, you told them what you knew?
Yes, ma'am.
One moment. I don't have anything else, Mr. Stabler. Thank you. The defense may have questions.
Cross-examination.
Now, Mr. Stabler, the first time the TBI came to talk to you about possible information regarding Zack Adams, you denied knowing anything, didn't you?
I don't recall that.
The first time they came to interview you, you denied knowing anything about Holly Bobo and who was responsible?
I don't recall that.
So that's a memory that you don't have now, is that correct?
It's been a long time, but yes.
Okay. And so, then you say when you were driving around Mr. Adams said, "I let Shane hit it."
Yes, ma'am.
And you assume what he meant was that he allowed Shane to rape Holly Bobo?
Yes, ma'am, I assume.
Okay, but you didn't ask any follow-up questions?
No.
Okay. And then you heard him say at a bar to Misty Tubbs, "I'll do you like I did Holly Bobo"?
Yes, ma'am.
But in the past, didn't you specifically say, you heard him say, "I'll do you like Holly Bobo"?
What past are you referring to? The night at the bar?
Before, when you've repeated that statement, wasn't it slightly different in that you said, Zack Adams said, "I'll do you like Holly Bobo," instead of "I'll do you like I did"?
I don't
Holly
remember
Bobo?
the specifics. I just remember him telling the bartender that night that he would kill her like he did Holly Bobo.
But he didn't say kill. He said, "I'll do you."
I'm not sure the exact words, but it was serious enough to,
Okay, but
you know.
it's possible.
Wait, I'm sorry, Your Honor, he's still talking. She
I
cannot.
think he finished. He
Cut
said
off.
it was serious enough was his statement.
Okay, I couldn't hear them, David.
And then on one more occasion, you heard him say, "I did it," when you were at the same bar.
Yes.
And you took that to mean that he was confessing that he had killed Holly Bobo. Or was
Yes.
involved. I don't mean to talk over you, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Okay. But you didn't ask any follow-up questions
No,
regarding?
ma'am.
No further questions?
And that's-
Yes, Ms. Thompson asked whether or not you denied having information. Actually, the first time TBI came to you was on December the 8th, 2011. I don't suppose you remember that day. I mean,
No,
the
not
exact-
specifically, no, ma'am.
Okay, but on that day, in addition to the things you testified to, did you also provide them with additional information about Zack Adams regarding his drug usage in the immediate days following Holly's disappearance?
Will you repeat the question, please?
Okay, did you also tell TBI about Zack Adams' drug usage right after Holly Bobo came up missing?
Yes.
Tell the jury what you told them back in 2011.
I said that he had been high out of his mind for days or weeks, just out of his, like, too high to function.
And that was in the days and weeks following?
Yes, ma'am.
And that's also the same interview that you told them that he blurted out, "I let Shane hit it"?
Yes, ma'am.
It's also the same interview where you told them that at Johnny's bar in Decatur County, he became upset with Misty Tubbs and made the statement that he did about Holly.
Yes, ma'am.
During the time, now, they talked to you again several years later, and at that time, you indicated that Zack Adams was driving several different cars during that period of time. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you know him to drive a white Nissan truck?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you know him to drive occasionally, and that Jason Autry was driving a PT Cruiser,
Yes, ma'am.
and that Shane Austin was driving a Crown Victoria?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Now, you remember speaking to our investigators, two women that came to talk to you?
Yes.
don't you? And so you specifically told them, you described Zack Adams as being passive aggressive and liked to mess with people's heads,
Yes.
didn't you? And so just a moment ago also, you testified that Zack Adams, there was a point at which he was so high, he was using so many drugs that he was unable to really function.
Yes.
Okay.
Of
And
sound mind.
At the time he talked about letting Shane hit it, that was right during the middle of that time when he was so high he was having a hard time functioning.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. No further questions.
One on that. You indicated that, and I left this out on purpose the first time, but Ms. Thompson asked about head games. Was he playing head games when he pulled guns on you multiple times?
Objection, Your Honor. It's outside the scope.
Oh. How is that outside the scope?
Let's just move on. All right, you can be excused. Do not discuss your testimony with anyone.
Good afternoon. I'm Lisa Garber, and this is Law News. I'm here with Jessica Sloan, and we are discussing the Holly Bobo trial, and we're waiting right now to hear from the jury. And we were just listening to some testimony from CarlStapler, who was Zachary Adams, the defendant in this case, one of his good friends. He was talking about drug use that was rampant in their group of friends, especially how Zachary Adams was quote unquote high out of his mind, and he was going through a certain period of time leading up to the events at hand. And Jessica, I'd like to turn back to you to talk about the drug use issues that we've seen in this case. You were talking about some of the mitigation issues and how the defense counsel might proceed if there is a verdict of guilty. But there also is a problem that it's kind of like unringing the bell, right? Because you're hearing all of this layman discussion of drug use, but you're not hearing any expert testimony to sort of guide the jury to understand how this could impact the community, how this could have impacted Zachary Adams, how it could have impacted any of the numerous witnesses that were on the stand. So I know you had some points to make on that. Do you wanna go ahead?
Yeah. So let me first say, it's easy to sit in this chair here and critique the defense attorney. There's so many factors going on at trial that you've just got so many competing things that need your resources, need your attention, and it's really hard to do. It's also almost an impossible task to do a good death penalty trial as a defense attorney. The first phase, again, is the guilt phase, whether or not your client is guilty. The second phase is the penalty phase, whether they should live or die. That's a lot to take on, but they're also sort of inconsistent in nature. The first phase, you're sitting there telling the jury, he didn't do it, he didn't do it, he didn't do it. But in that second phase, the penalty phase, you're saying, okay, fine, he did it, you found him guilty, but this is why he did it, or this is how he arrived at this moment, and these are all the mitigating factors that you should be considering against the weight of this horrible crime and the evidence you've heard in finding him guilty. So again, to really weave that cohesive narrative is almost impossible, but it does include putting up experts in the guilt phase that can contextualize to the jury, why is it important that somebody testified that he was too high to function? What does that mean in terms of committing this crime and his brain science and his ability to control his functioning and make decisions and control his impulses? And why should the jury actually understand that and take that into account when reaching a decision on whether he should die or live? So it is a very, very difficult position to be in. Again, it's one that, years from now, if he is found guilty and sentenced to death, he will be given a habeas attorney who will go back through all of the trial testimony. They'll look at all of the investigation that the defense did. They'll get all of the boxes and boxes of records, hopefully, that the defense has collected and all of the witness notes and testimony, and they'll start piecing together how the defense attorney put together their investigation, and they'll look for errors. They'll look for ineffective assistance of counsel, and they'll make an argument that it was ineffective not to put on an expert who could contextualize some of this lay witness testimony and tell the jury why this stuff really matters and why it's actually mitigating of the aggravation that was presented in this case. It's likely that the court could say, well, it's not an error on the attorney's part. It's actually a strategic decision, and we hear that a lot on habeas, that the attorney didn't want to conflict with their not guilty message. So it's a very hard position to be in as an attorney. I am not envious of her position, but I think there will likely be, if he is found guilty and sentenced to death, reasons on habeas appeal to point to ineffective assistance of counsel.
And what do you make of some of the other issues? We're talking about mitigation factors. What about, you were talking about family histories and social histories, things like that. What about fellow parents or fellow family members that have been in jail? We're hearing from a lot of witnesses that have family members that were in jail. How could that impact the sentencing as well?
Absolutely. And, you know, we realize there's trauma from having a parent who's incarcerated. There's 2.2 million people who are incarcerated right now, but there are 28 million kids growing up in our country today whose parents are in a jail or a prison population. Just yesterday, I was in a jail in Kentucky touring the facility, and I met women who were in there, who are mothers, who are in there for drug addiction. And I talked to them a little bit about their relationships with their kids. They said they get a parenting class once a week, but the kids aren't present. And then I got to look at the visitation room. And these are moms who are parenting their children through half-hour visits in which they look at a video screen. The kids are brought into the basement of the jail, and the parents stay upstairs in custody looking at their children through a video screen for a half hour a week. You can't parent that way. Right. It's just impossible. So there's a breakdown in the family where the most stable center of the family, the parent, is not there to do the parenting. And sometimes a grandparent steps in, but a lot of the time we see, you know, situations where a grandparent has been incarcerated or where they're not able to take care of the kid and they end up in foster care and the like. So, you know, incarceration has a huge impact on how kids are being parented right now, and that will be a factor in penalty if it comes up.
So Jessica Jackson Sloan, such a pleasure to have you on. Jessica Jackson Sloan, the co-founder of #Cut50, which is a national bipartisan organization to reduce America's incarceration rate. And just as any closing statement, I know that unfortunately it's a little late for them to bring on an expert to talk about drug use, to talk about some of the ways that incarceration might have affected the defendant at this point. Any closing thoughts as to what you think might happen now as we are waiting to hear from the jury? They're in the midst of deliberation. Any closing thoughts you have?
Yeah, I think it's really important. Hopefully the defense has been preparing for a penalty phase, even though they've got a lot on their plate. It's always a possibility coming into these trials that you're going to reach a penalty phase. So even though there was no expert testimony contextualizing the drug use and the impact it had on the defendant in the guilt phase, I would hope that they have a neurologist, a social historian, you know, other experts who can come in and explain some of these mitigating factors, some of the social history, and why it matters in the penalty phase if he is found guilty. Again, you know, this is a system that's fraught with human bias and error, so not every death penalty attorney is going to do that. But hopefully his attorney will be prepared for the penalty phase and will be able to save his life then.
Thank you so much, Jessica. It was a pleasure having you on today. Thank you.